I'm going to introduce our speaker in a few in a minute, but I just wanted to tell you a little bit about like just some of the things that have been in the media. And there's a bit of talk, more talk right now about suicide, but still suicide and mental health are taboo subjects. People don't talk about them. And when they do, sometimes there's a lot of judgment. For instance, this person who died by suicide, Stephen Twitchboss. Do you know who that is? Okay, I don't watch TV, so I don't know who he is. I didn't know who he was, but until I read all the stuff about him. He was on the Ellen DeGeneres show. And when he died, there were lots of questions. It's like, and a lot of judgments. But he had so many resources. How could he do this to his family? But it's almost the holidays. And things like, what a selfish thing to do. For me, this subject with regards to suicide is an emotional one because someone close to me has attempted suicide twice in the last few years. A former board director who I respected and admired died last year. And it wasn't until I was kind of wondering about what had happened. You always wonder when someone's obituary or death information is filed and it does not mention the cause of death. And that was the case with this situation. I found out in November that he had died by suicide. Not only that, someone that he worked with that I was going to work on a project with. And then I was wondering, well, how come I stopped hearing from him? He had actually died by suicide as well. So it's kept very secretive. It is something that needs to be dealt with or needs to be addressed. And so I'm hoping that Lou will give us some tools here. Lou is the Director of Community Learning and Engagement at the Crisis Center of BC. She brings a passion for working together to build suicide safe communities and the interconnection between suicide prevention and life promotion. With a bachelor's degree in sociology and a master's in educational studies, she has worked for more than 30 years in education and training programs and promotion. And we're talking with Lou and the Crisis Center of BC with regards to possibly putting on some webinars at the UCP that anyone can attend for free. And hopefully will bring more exposure to this important subject. With that, I hand things over to Lou.
Righty. Oh, wow. Bright. Okay. I thought I'd start just by saying a thank you to you all. Um, as a person just living in the world, we often don't think about the people who make sure that we have water in our homes and make sure that wastewater gets removed. And it's kind of when I was asked to do this session, it kind of led me to kind of think about that a little bit more. So thank you for the work you do that I really didn't even think about really beforehand. I much appreciate it. So much gratitude. Um, PowerPoint. There we are. Okay. So how do I click? Oh, I can't see anything. There we are. Okay. So, well, thank you for having me. We do a lot of work, our agency, with a lot of different construction like businesses and others in kind of similar industries to kind of think about how we can work to prevent suicide. So, this is the agency that I come from. And so, we're really dedicated to providing hope and help to individuals, communities, and organizations. Um, we're a nonprofit. Um, and I will be sharing with you a little bit about some of the resources that I'm hoping you might find useful to know about and share within your industry. So, what are we hoping to do today? This is different than that one. Is that okay? Oh, there it is. Okay, there's a different picture on every screen. So really what I'm hoping to share is some insights into the emerging approach around suicide prevention and to get you thinking about your workplaces a little bit more and what you're doing and what you could be doing more to help kind of promote mental health and help prevent suicide. So really this idea of building suicide safer communities. Am I doing this or what am I doing here? Oops. Yeah, I think I need to put it down when I'm talking. So it's very touchy. Okay. So just to note that we all have histories in life going on. And as was mentioned, many of us may be in or have been in ourselves impacted by this topic. So just always a reminder to monitor yourself, take care of yourself. And I'll stick around a little bit at the end if you wanted to talk about anything further. And I will be giving numbers that you can call as well. So why are we talking about suicide prevention? So just some stats around the cost of suicide beyond the obvious, right? So 2016 data is looking at the national economic cost of suicide at 2.4 billion in Canada. Obviously, the human cost of suicide that ripples through families, schools, and whole communities are immeasurable. Improving mental health in the workplace can decrease loss to productivity by as much as 30%. So even thinking about mental health in general, we know that people who are taking care of their mental health are going to be more productive, right? And 70% of suicides in Canada are among working age adults. So that's just something to keep in mind when you're thinking about your own industry. This one takes a little longer. So, what are some of the kind of thinking about the occupations? And when we were asked to come and do this presentation here, it was something we jumped at because we don't get an opportunity to talk to industries all the time where there may be high rates of suicide. So, some of the occupations associated with higher rates of suicide, you can sort of take a look at some of the things. Kind of construction, installation, is a big thing. I don't know if you consider that following in. Maintenance and repair workers are some of the highest rates of suicide, as well as some of the factors around occupations where there's high rates. Obviously, legal access to means may be one, exposures to chemicals that may impact mood or behavior, high workplace stress, right? Dangerous working conditions, job insecurity, contract work, low wages, work schedule or shift work, and working alone are some of the things that are associated with a higher suicide rate. One of the things I wanted to point out that's quite interesting around suicide is that it's 3/4 of the deaths by suicide are men. And so I'm kind of assuming it's a bit of a male dominated profession. And I think that this is important. It's also important to know the age, right? So in Canada in 2019, there were 4,012 reported suicides. Over 3,000 of them were men, and the vast majority of them were between the ages of 45 and 64. So that's not to suggest that women are not vulnerable, but it is to kind of shine a light on the fact that men are overrepresented. So I thought maybe, just you came here today, maybe you're interested in thinking about what you can be doing in your workplace, in the industry to help mitigate suicide risk. I thought maybe if you're spending a couple of minutes just right now in the online group as well, about what are some of the factors in your industry that you think might be associated with suicide risk. So if you're at a table just speaking among yourselves, um, is there anything that stands out for your industry that you know of? And then maybe we can just have a discussion afterwards. So I'll just couple of minutes just with the persons next to you to share what do you think are some of the factors that might be associated with suicide risk within your industry? There without my glasses. Okay, so let's just come back and maybe if there were any thoughts or questions around what what you think might be one of the factors or some of the factors that may increase suicide risk in your industry. Anybody care to share?
Like, so
Okay, perfect.
Well, we just said that overwhelming responsibility.
Okay. Yeah, there is an overwhelming responsibility. So taking a lot on your shoulders. Yeah. Awesome. Thanks.
Gonna get my running points in today. I'm thinking more on relationships.
Relationships. Yeah. Do you care to say more?
Um, Say if your partner is saying to leave, then that might come into your mind and suicide.
So relationships outside of work, you mean? Or works in in among colleagues? Oh, okay.
Okay.
Interesting. Okay. Hmm.
Is it on? We talked a bit about that in our industry. I'm making some generalizations, but in our industry, I think a lot of operators have a very strong personality. They're sort of like that strong silent type, whether it's male or female. Um, Very like fiercely independent people, I think, but they also care about things, which is why they do the work that they do. And I think if you have that combination, maybe you might see a higher incidence of people not bringing forward issues. And then it's also a very traditional, unionized environment is a common environment. There's not always people that you can reach out and talk to. So it's, I would say, out of like the places that I've worked, not always a sort of warm and fuzzy environment. If you compare to like office environment where people will sit down and chit chat, a little bit about them. Our work tends to be quite busy, so people are like running around getting things done. There's not a lot of time for chit chat.
Right. Yeah. Awesome. Thank you. Any other? Mhm.
One of the things that we talked about, just adding on to relationships, was personal relationships, like a marriage breakup or death of a spouse. And then the other thing that Rob brought up is like, it seems in so many of these cases, when someone dies by suicide, their immediate circle is so surprised. Like I think sometimes there's almost like guilt involved there. It's like we did not see any signs.
100% for sure. Yeah. Yeah. True. Cool. Interesting. That's interesting. And one thing about relationship breakups that we know is that it's the number one um, factor. So like it's obviously it's not one thing doesn't cause someone to think about suicide or engage in suicide behavior. And we do know that a relationship breakdown in a personal life, like a marriage, can be that catalyst often that will take somebody who's probably not doing so well to take that kind of action. So that's huge. Yeah. Thank you. All right. So, one of the things that might be on your mind, because it's often on people's minds, is should we even talk about this, right? So I commend you for coming today and talking about something that you might even be a bit hesitant. You might be thinking, I'm not even so sure that we should talk about this, right? So there's lots of hesitation in talking directly about suicide. We know often how we describe that is this idea of S talk, right? This idea of not using the word or often joking about it, often within industries where there's lots of stigma. So I work a lot with police officers, and they talk a lot about S-talk within their industry, where people often joke about suicide, right? That's a common thing. That's part of S-talk too, right? So this idea that it's really hard to kind of admit that one's struggling with suicide, it's really hard to admit that maybe someone in someone's life is struggling with suicide. S-talk, right? Joking, avoiding it, not really wanting to talk about it, of course, right? And you can think about some of the reasons of that, right? It's not easy, right? There's lots of stigma, there's lots of shame, there's lots of fear that if we do talk about it, then what does that mean? Will people make that choice, right? So it's better to kind of not talk about it at all, is kind of the assumption. And what we do know is if we talk about it in a safe way, it can be really helpful. It can really destigmatize. I know for many people, including myself, as it was actually acknowledging suicide in one's existence in life that actually gave them the ability to move forward. So what is they talk about, right? Stigma, fear, perhaps our own personal history, shame, culture, right? There's a culture within your industry you're even talking about that doesn't have to be, ethnic culture. It could be a culture within your industry of kind of keeping it all together, right? Religion, right? All can play a role in this idea of S-talk. So let's talk about how S-talk impacts us a little bit more. So I'm going to show a series of slides, and I'm going to start with this one. And none of these slides are going to make sense, but they'll make sense at the end. So here I have a blank slide. Until kind of recently, this blank slide represented our culture, our society's understanding of suicide. We just didn't talk about it. I know. I have somebody in my personal life who almost took her life, and no one in my family has ever talked about it. Right? So this kind of blankness, right? It's this just not talked about. It's starting to crack a little bit, but it's there, right? So I'm going to try and create a picture of actually, well, we have this blank slide representing our inability or unwillingness to talk about it, which we all have. I'm going to start to paint a picture of you about the impact of suicide in our communities and our lives that maybe will hope to get you see it a little bit differently. So this is a picture, and it's not a complete picture. You can't even tell what the picture is. And it's a part of the picture of suicide in our society. It's a picture of completed suicides every year. So we know in Canada, there were over 4,000 suicides in 2019, and there were over 600 in British Columbia. And that's just the reported suicides. We also know that 20 to 40% more suicides go unreported, right? An accident, an overdose. We don't know, right? So that's a picture. That's part of the picture of suicide, but it's not a complete picture. This next slide, you might even be able to start to get a little bit more of an idea of what's behind this picture. This is a picture of people who engage in suicide behavior. So taking action every year to do something to possibly end their life. And we know that it's about 60% more than the deaths by suicide. We know that some of these people we might know someone who engaged in behavior and end up in the hospital and then come out. And sometimes it's people do things and we don't even know, right? So that's a lot of people in our society. And you're starting to kind of see what's behind this when we look at this idea of people who attempt suicide, right? Or suicide behavior. So now I'm going to give you a picture and you're starting to see it a little bit more clearly. We're going to include people every year who have thoughts of suicide. And it's 6% of the population at least every year who has thoughts of suicide, right? That's a lot of people. This next picture is becoming quite clear, and it includes people who know of somebody, somebody who died by suicide, somebody who attempted suicide, maybe even yourself, right? We all have had our struggles at some point. So you can start to see when we look at it in this way, what does it tell us? We're all likely impacted by this issue more than we care to remember or remind ourselves. And we'll all likely be impacted at some point or have been. And so that reminds us that this is a human. We tend to see suicide traditionally in our culture as sort of like affecting certain people, right? Put them in a little box. But as was reminded in our introduction of that Ellen DeGeneres person that worked with Ellen, it impacts people from all backgrounds and all walks of life. There's not a type. Any of us, and any of us in the future could be impacted by have our own thoughts of suicide. So that's why I'm hoping that today you'll get something to take from this, either for your workplace or for yourself. So how does this idea of S talk, this idea of not really wanting to talk about suicide, right? Because it's a hard topic, let's be real, and many of us feel disempowered. Kind of think about this picture right now and how this S talk impacts us. So here we have somebody in the white shirt here. This is somebody who's maybe having thoughts of suicide, right? And he's thinking, should I tell about my thoughts of suicide? What do should I tell? But he's hesitating, but he kind of wants to, right? And for anybody who has struggled with suicide, you know this. You want to talk about it, you want to, but there's this stuff that holds you back, right? What do you think might hold somebody back? Why do people want to talk about it, but why are they careful? What do you think? Embarrassment. It's really super embarrassing. Totally. Yeah. What else? Judgment. Yeah. Totally. Yeah. And think about work, right? Do you want to share this at work? Oh, shame. Yeah. Shame. Shame. What are they going to think of me? Like here I'm, I got it together, and here I'm crumbling in the inside right now, right? Right. So much. They might be afraid of the reaction, right? Well, people freak out. Will I get sent to the psych ward? Will they call the police? What will happen to my family? Right? So much there. But there is a desire to tell about it. And then you have this other person who's kind of noticing some things, right? And we'll talk about some of those things in a bit, like how people might tell us, right? But this person here in the blue shirt is like, oh, Buddy seems off lately, and he's saying some things, and Jesus, Louise, I'm even thinking that my buddy's thinking about killing himself, but I better not mention it, right? Very, very, very common reaction. I've had it many times. Like, do I say something? What happens? So what is that about? That when you notice something and you're concerned, but you don't want to mention it, what do you think that might be about? It could trigger it, kind of takes the lid off the can of worms, potentially. And it's like, well, will I be able to manage that? Yeah. Thank you. What else? Any other thoughts about what prevents you from kind of saying, "Hey, buddy, like you're talking about some pretty heavy things here, and I'm actually concerned," right? What else? Why might we hesitate to then do that and even ask about suicide or talk about it directly? Yeah. What if they say, "Yeah, uh-huh, 100%, 100%, yeah, yeah," then what, right? Yeah, yeah. So like, yeah, you might not be equipped. And you might not feel emotionally equipped too, and that's okay, right? Like we a lot of what we work on is no it's recognizing that, and there's no pressure on anybody. We just want to kind of explore what prevents us. Like I remember a time in my life when my nephew said that he actually wanted to kill himself, and I was afraid to say, "Let's talk about that," because I didn't know what to do at that time, right? So for sure. So this is a very common dynamic. It happens. I even counsel counselors on this kind of stuff. I'm not kidding you. All of us are impacted by this, right? So no shame. It's just the reality. And that's what we're trying to help break down and equip people. Most often, people who are thinking about suicide want help, but they don't know how to ask about it, and they maybe don't feel worthy, and maybe they don't even feel like there's anything that could help, right? And most often, we tell somebody that we kind of think we trust in some way, right? We want to tell somebody that we trust. Often it's a friend, right? So the big thing to remember is I'll share with you a little story. So we at my agency answer a suicide line. That's one of our key works is supporting people who are in a suicide crisis. And I'm hoping that you'll be able to share that amongst your community because it's an important line because it's anonymous and all of the not anonymous, sorry, but confidential. We're not completely anonymous. We can locate people. And so I asked one of our call takers who's been doing this for a long time, what's one of your biggest takeaways? And she says, how suicide kind of comes and goes. Somebody will call and be totally in a suicide crisis, and we'll do a follow up call the next day, and they'll be like, I was thinking about suicide. I don't even remember. Oh, wow, right? It's very up and down and very episodic. And the other thing with keeping that in mind, people like all of us who struggle with suicide at some point in our life aren't certain that we don't want to live. We're just feeling like we don't know how to live in this moment, right? And we actually want help at some level, right? That we know. We know that, right? But there's this not knowing who or how to reach out and talk about it. But most people are uncertain. They're not, most people are rarely, even if they're certain in a moment, it can change very easily. So people who are thinking about suicide, they tell us in some way often. Now they don't tell everybody, but they likely tell somebody. So how do they tell? These are some examples of ways that we might notice or we might be makes us our spidey senses go up that someone could be thinking about suicide. So someone being very happy after a period of depression, that might be a sign. Acting more aggressive or stressed out than usual. Commenting on being tired all the time and noticeably fatigued. Making comments about being a burden to others. Everyone would be better off if I wasn't here. Maybe not showing up for work as often or having periods of absenteeism. Maybe not being as productive. Now, obviously, you could be having some of these and not thinking about suicide. I'm not making that assumption, but those are some things to be aware of. And often the things that people will say, like, I wish that everything would just end. I wish it was over, right? Those kinds of things. I just want to die. Those are really good indicators that someone might be having thoughts of suicide. Are there any other questions about ways that people might tell us, sort of the signs, if you will? Hmm.
Hello. This isn't too much of a question about other signs. I kind of was curious on the first point, if that could be explained a bit more, like
Being very
being very
happy.
happy after a period. Like, is that not necessarily almost like a positive sign to see that the troubled time is over, I guess.
It's awesome. It could be, and it might not be. Has anybody ever, I'll share with you a story. I had someone very close to me who was hospitalized for 4 days due to suicide attempt. And after a really long period of struggling with post traumatic stress. And when I talked to her on the phone, she sounded really different. It felt kind of odd, right? And I asked, well, you've been thinking about suicide. You almost tried to think about suicide. Are you thinking about suicide now? And she said, no, right? So it could be a good thing. What we also know is that sometimes a change from a depression to feeling up is a reason to explore that a little bit more and be aware of it, because it could mean that somebody's kind of made some sort of decision. So it's a possible sign, if that makes sense. It's not always. Sometimes it's a great thing. Like the person I had in my life, they're like, no. But sometimes it's an indication of, and it's just a reason to check out, right? Maybe they're feeling better, but maybe it is an indication they've made some decision. But does that make sense?
Yes, I think it makes sense.
It makes
It
sense.
sounds like it's kind of what you're implying with maybe making a decision that there's almost something that's now been settled in their mind, and that might be a negative.
Yeah,
But okay.
totally. Yeah. Could be also if someone goes on medication, sometimes they can have more energy, um, and have like that can also cause a suicide, even though they're on medication. So they seem kind of up, but the suicide hasn't necessarily been dealt with. So it can be an indicator for sure. Hmm.
No, I just had a question on the first one as well. Like for me personally, I deal with serious situations by being happy, if that makes sense. I'd rather be happy than anything else, and then I'll look for those supports on my own. So, what if there's a situation like that? Like, say, a good example, and I hate using this, but like someone like Robin Williams, where they show on the outside that they're always happy, but they always have those serious concerns. Because I've been in that situation before, just working on helping my nation as a leader. Dealt with some serious challenges with some of my knowledge keepers saying like laughter is the best medicine, especially in certain situations, and that's just how we have been for thousands of years, right? So,
Yeah.
like for me personally, like I just think that way. I'd rather show my family that I'm strong and
Yep.
out and just be happy, but in the background of dealing with those serious situations, and I'm not saying just for me thinking that way, but I deal with situations like that. And how can you tell with a person that protrudes himself is always happy, and then not knowing that they have that underlying thoughts in the background kind of thing, right? So
Yeah, no, it's a really good question. And sometimes it's really hard, isn't it? If someone seems happy all the time, someone seems happy all the time. Um, if you notice a shift, like again with the person in my life, I noticed that you were really down and now you sound really good. Are you still having thoughts of suicide? Right? Like just because sometimes if people are struggling or say someone that's like had a whole bunch of really hard things happen in their life, but they're like, I'm good, right? And you're like, really? Like, are you really good? Just really in an authentic way. Maybe they are, right? We don't know, but people do mask, as you said, right? And so it's just being aware that just because someone seems happy, particularly if you know that they've dealt with some stuff and maybe dealt with depression or experienced a lot of loss, you know, checking in and being aware that doesn't mean that they are actually happy, right? Particularly if you see other signs. Yeah. Any other thoughts?
their thoughts as well, right?
So, sorry, say that again. I didn't.
Oh, just like if you were to ask somebody if they were having those thoughts, for that person to admit that they're, experiencing those thoughts would be,
Yeah.
that's quite the hurdle.
Yeah. Except remembering that people actually are looking for that subconsciously, right? This idea that people are looking for help, even though they're not saying it outright. So that's what we know. When we can recognize that this is somebody asking for help and then asking about suicide, people often feel relieved. Right? It's true because they're telling us, right? So a reminder is for people who are struggling with suicide, I need to tell. And we don't often see it this way. We often think, well, they don't want to tell anybody. They're trying to hide it. They might be. And there's also a part of them that is likely wanting to tell. I need to tell someone of my thoughts of suicide. I would like to tell several people. I'm saying it cautious. I am cautious in saying it as openly as I would like to. And I'm watching for reactions. Back to the comment there, right? This is what we know about suicide. People are looking for help. They're wanting help. They want to talk about it, but they're cautious because of this S talk, right? And we're looking for reactions. How will this person react to this? Because I want to talk about it, I need someone to be able to ask. So once I have given you any indication that I may be thinking about suicide, I want you to ask me exactly about suicide. Ask me as directly, clearly, and as soon as you can. Right now, that is exactly what I'm wanting you to do. So maybe it's something like, buddy, you've had a big loss, your marriage fell apart, you kind of been on a roller coaster, and you're saying some things that are really concerning to me. And I may be way off base here, but sometimes when people talk about ending it all, they're actually talking about ending it all. They're talking about suicide. Is that what's happening? Right. So being able to ask those questions, that question, and even if it's like, man, I don't know, I might be way off base, but asking. I had to ask my 8-year-old once because my 8-year-old was giving me indications. And I was like, and I said, you're talking a lot about dying. What's that about? And he talked a bit more. And I said, sometimes when people talk about dying, they're actually thinking they want to die. Is that happening for you? He's like, no. I'm like, okay, good. But we can talk about it if it does. Right. So this idea of, because thinking about suicide's a human experience. So being able to talk about it and ask is really critical. And when someone says, yeah, I am, or sometimes, or maybe, I need someone to listen. I hope that you are a good listener. I hope that you will listen to what I have to say and not what you want me to say. And I need to clear my thoughts by talking them through. And then finally, I need someone to help me keep safe. Chances are, if I'm thinking about suicide, I feel stuck. I don't know what to do. I need someone to help me to think about what needs to be done. And I need some help thinking about the dangers, that I'm not aware of. So this acronym stands for TALK. Need to tell, need someone to ask, need someone to listen, and need someone to help keep safe. This is what is needed for people who are thinking about suicide. So you might be thinking, who it can or is prepared to talk, right? Prepared to do these steps. So we do training to help people do these steps. You know, we've worked in construction industry and the electrical industry to help build these steps for their HR, but also for the the industry itself, because we know that people often don't want to go to people in places of power, right? Lots of S talk. So we need, what we're trying to do in our communities is build as many people as possible that are prepared to do talk. And I'll talk a little bit more about that at the end. Also, our agency is there to do talk, the Crisis Center of BC, and we have free 24-hour, easy to access phone numbers that if one thing comes out of this, maybe you start to advertise so that even people know about it, right? So you think about letting the workforce know that there's a suicide help number and you can call that and no one at work is going to know, right? So sometimes that's what we do to help prevent suicide is let people know. That's a way to really destigmatize suicide, right? So I did this whole training with an BC electric company, and that's the one thing that they were like, we're going to definitely do that. We're going to put up posters and we're going to put it on our intranet that people like this 1-800 suicide line number. So we don't know of who calls, because even calling an EAP number, right? Sometimes people don't want to call an EAP number. So it's good to have a diversity of numbers that people can call. So I wanted to say something about some things. So just some sort of tangibles that if you suspect someone is having thoughts of suicide. So one of the things, is just to acknowledge what you're noticing, like, hey, you seem quite hopeless, the relationship broke up and it's been tough with your kids, eh? Like, what's going on? Like, just even like just acknowledging that people aren't doing well or that you're noticing that, right? Again, knowing that asking about suicide, and again, I know that not everybody's comfortable doing that, and that's totally fine. I don't expect it, but just to be aware of the fact that just pointing it out and even saying things like, I might be off base here, man. I might be off base and I'm concerned, right? And if we ask in that kind of way, the vast, vast majority of time, people will be relieved. Because what we know about suicide is people try and tell. People try and tell people, right? They drop little hints and often people don't pick it up, right? So, being able to say, like, you're talking about wanting a way out of everything. And you're talking about not wanting, I hear you sometimes say that living sucks. I'm concerned. Sometimes that's about suicide, right? Is that what you're thinking, right? Right. So knowing that that's okay, knowing that that's okay. One of the main things that we can do, so I was at a conference a couple of months ago for people who had really, really been struggling with suicide, so much so that they were institution, like in the hospital, right? So these are really struggling with suicide. And it was a conference to provide health authorities with information on how hospitals and healthcare can be more responsive. And the big message that these people had for the hospital staff was, when we come in and we say we need help because we're going to kill ourselves, thank us for coming. Right? That's, so even just saying, I'm really glad you told me that. Or that must be hard to share. I'm glad you told me. Being able to just try and stay calm. It's okay. You're taking this thing that's in a person's mind and you're putting it out here, and it's going to reduce the intensity if you talk about it. Thank you. Thank you for telling me this, right? And then the thing that we recommend doing is together, just saying, hey, I'm wondering if we can call somebody. You're having thoughts of suicide. I have a resource. Or I have a couple of ideas. Would you be open to talking to somebody else, right? So these are the things that we also teach in our safe talk training to teach you to do the TALK, but this is a bit of a summary, right? And so having a couple and just saying, you know what, I can call together. Maybe giving even a call. You're welcome to call the 1-800-suicide and say, I'm here with my friend. They're they're really struggling. They're having thoughts of suicide. Can you talk to them, right? And then just pass the phone over. So let's pause at this point and see if there were any questions or concerns or feedback. I am going to just, before I take the questions, let you know about these resources. So this is from our agency. We're not, how do I say this? We're a nonprofit that has been built on the backs of volunteers. It started in 1969 because the community said, you know what? We can all play a role in helping people who are struggling and in crisis. So the people who answer these phone lines are often volunteers who are trained and supported. But it just reminds us that while clinical mental health help might be helpful for some folks, it's the immediate here and now, someone who listens, someone who can do these talk steps that people need, right? So the 1-800-suicide line number can talk about suicide. You can call with somebody else, can let your kids know. Maybe, yeah, I went to this session. They told us about this number, right? Just even spreading the word, right? It can lets people know that there's others there. Like one of the big things it can do is help humanize suicide. So it's not seen as something that happens to like certain people. It can happen to anybody and it's okay. And the vast majority of people get through it.
No, I just had a question for that
Yeah,
because I'm the person who loves to help. My only biggest concern, I heard it from someone before about having the capacity to help someone that's thinking this way. So, but I don't want to make the situation worse by referring them to a number and them feeling like that I don't care. I genuinely do, but I don't ever want to put myself in that position and carry that with the rest of my days if they do decide to feel that way. And you know what I mean. So, for me, my biggest concern is like I'll help my own family, but when it comes to other people, like I've been in situations with young ones, really want to help them, but I just don't want to give them the wrong advice. I know any advice is good advice, but
Yeah.
steer them in the right direction. That's something that would weigh heavily on my mind if
Yeah.
anything had ever happened to those people, right? So
Yeah.
it's just a question.
A-
Yeah.
A couple of things. If you come at this from a caring place, you're unlikely to cause more problems, right? If it's caring. And I'm also hearing your awareness around boundaries for yourself, and that sometimes things might be better off connecting someone to another resource. Both are true, right? So the idea of totally acknowledging that, right? And saying, how would it be if if we could call this number right now, right? Knowing that there's somebody else that, because you're totally right. It's about a community and a safety net for everybody. So being able to, I don't recommend saying something like, this is outside my pay grade. I can't help. It's kind of like, hey, this is important. I'm wondering if I could give you a number right now and if we could give them a call and you could talk to them. Right. Yeah. So I really appreciate those boundaries for sure. Yeah. Other comments or back to this? Sorry. What? Why are they all different? Any other questions or comments about this response? Any other questions or any other questions about these phone lines? Hmm.
Is to have those conversations.
Yep.
So although you may not feel like you're equipped, I actually don't think you need to be equipped. I think you just need to have the conversation and see where it goes.
Yeah. Yeah. Totally. Yeah. It is nice to feel equipped. But I will also share, as working in this field, you're never 100% equipped, right? There have been times where I feel like I'm equipped with maybe dealing with strangers, but then I have to deal with someone in my family or a really good friend. Yeah, and it's hard for sure. So we're never 100% equipped. I appreciate that. Any other questions or comments? Hey, so I want to really point out um, some of the things that prevent suicide are really taking a look at ourselves and our communities, and even if you're in a leadership position, your industries, and thinking about what promotes life, right? Um, that's huge. And so maybe even just taking a mental note right now for yourself of, something that promotes your life and something that you want to do more of, because it's really important to take care of ourselves too, right? At our core. So I thought we'd go back into groups based on some of the things that we've talked about right now, or maybe even some new things. And what are some ideas for your workplace to become what we call suicide safer? So anything that you might do in your workplace to help sort of build this idea that, if somebody's struggling with suicide, they can get help to prevent suicide. So maybe just at your table again for a few minutes and then we'll share some of the ideas. Righty. Maybe we could, were there any thoughts around some of the actions that could be taken?
Talk about it like in safety meetings and stuff, as opposed to just, sorry, talk about it more in safety meetings and stuff, as opposed to just, giving the EAP pamphlet when you're hired type deal.
Awesome. So talking about it more, letting people know about numbers perhaps, and we know we have the EAPs, but recognizing that maybe there's other resources as well. Yeah. Awesome. Other ideas.
So the couple of things we talked about was posting information in strategic places. So if you are posting EFAB information or a suicide hotline phone number, making sure that it's also available in places that are a little bit more private so people can actually
Oh.
copy that information down or snap a photo of it.
Yep.
So if it's in a busy hallway, they might not have an opportunity to bring that information home.
Awesome. Yeah.
And then if you're in a leadership position, having the courage to even share your own experiences potentially at safety meetings or things like that, or just letting people, making people aware that you're sort of open to having conversations if you are.
Yeah. Awesome. Great. Thank you. Any other thoughts? Yeah.
So I'm thinking about, we used to have safety meetings every 2 weeks, but I'm thinking that you can probably go further from that and have safety meetings and just see where people are at, like, their emotions, their feelings,
Right.
and more personal.
Right. So bringing in,
That might help.
like emotional safety into the safety meetings. Yeah. Cool. Awesome. Cool. Yeah. So kind of some of the things, making employee resources well known, easily accessible and confidential. I also love that idea of places where people are actually likely to see it, right? Often forget about that. Employee assistance programs or human resources departments are able to help employees with access mental health services. So letting people even know that, right? And letting people know, I know with the EAP programs, like letting people know that the confidentiality piece of it, because again, I think a lot of people are worried that it will come back to them at the workplace. General mental health promotion, we all know that that is important, that work-life balance and mental health days and that sort of thing. You might be interested in suicide prevention awareness and training. And if you are, feel free to reach out to me. I'm happy to discuss what that might look like. And fostering, I heard this as well, fostering a culture where help seeking is encouraged, destigmatizing and humanizing suicide for sure. Excellent. Thank you for that. Kind of talked about that, but if there's any examples of a workplace strategy that someone's already done, anybody care to share? Any examples of something that maybe you've done to build suicide safer communities and the impact of that?
Uh, our staff has actually had anger management courses and to be more aware of people that are coming in and just noticing how they are and asking them how they're feeling. You never know what's on somebody else's plate and why they're having a bad day.
Awesome.
So you've got to try and relate to them first before getting two people mad is worse than having one person mad. So it's better to hit it right in the nose than.
Yeah. Anger management. That's great. Thank you for sharing that. Yeah. Any other examples? Okay. So I did want to let you know about some of the training that we offer. We offer suicide response training for everybody. So anybody can take our safe talk training, for example. We can go into workplaces. Uh, if you're interested, like I said, please do reach out. We also do like 1 hour kind of suicide awareness, letting people know about resources. Um, Happy to talk about that. We also offer crisis response training. So we've offered these at various, like I said, the electrical company, they had all their supervisors take our skillfully responding to distress, just so that their leadership teams are able to respond to the multitude of issues that people come to work with these days and know how to respond. So those are some examples of some trainings if you're interested. We work with an organization very loosely called Mates in Construction from Australia that have really taken some of these trainings and, you know, everybody in the industry, they've worked with the unions to make sure that everybody has these kind of trainings that help not only in the workplace, but in people's personal lives as well. We also have wellness and resiliency modules. If you're interested in them, again, happy to let you know more about what those are. Helping, like anger management. We don't have one on anger management, but we could build it. But we have mostly around preventing stress and burnout and just supporting our own resilience. Some tools and techniques for that. I also wanted to let you know that, despite all that we do to prevent suicide, it does happen. It does. And it's really, really important that if in a workplace scenario, for example, if it happens, you can reach out to us. We're happy to talk about the scenario, to provide some support for your agency. We also have different grief groups for people to attend. It's such an incredible, important part of the work, right? This grief support, it can't be undermined at all. It's incredibly important. And just to end it, we, as I said, we're a nonprofit. If you're interested in donating, we always take donating. I also let you know that we also have volunteers. So some of you might want to get involved in a volunteer capacity. Sometimes at various points in our lives, you have room for doing something new. We have volunteers that are on the phones. We have volunteers in the chats. We have volunteers that go into schools. So if you're looking for something to add to your life a little bit more, maybe that, you're at that stage, do consider that or spread the word, because that's how we are able to do the work we do, is by having a real community of people that really can be there for others. And as well as I said, our training. So that about wraps it up a little bit early, but I'm happy to take any questions. It's about 10 after 2. Any questions or comments? Thank you all for being here today.
Any questions for anybody?
Yeah, questions, anybody? Was that me? Was that me? I think it has a bit of its mind of its own up here. It keeps changing the slides. And anyway, thank you all. And I hope you found it useful. And I'm happy. I didn't put my email up there, but it's lripley@crisiscenter.bc.ca. Or you can just Google Crisis Center of BC and you can get in touch with us there. And I'm happy to discuss anything further, put you in the direction of other supports if that's needed, or other information, or talk through some options if you're looking at doing anything within your agency. So thank you.
Thank you, Lou.
Sure.
Okay. So we have a refreshment break right now. The next talk is at 3 o'clock today, which is 9 features that will shape the future of SCADA systems. And thank you very much.
Can you all also make sure you get scanned out of the rooms and in the rooms as well for your CEUs? Thank you.